This is the Quadratic Formula worksheet, assigned for homework. We're going to work through solving for x when we're given a quadratic equation. First 5 questions you can see is just working on the step that probably is the most confusing to students when they first start this, the last step of dealing with the plus minus. We know when we have a square root, there's a positive answer and a negative answer. And so when we solve these out, we're always going to have a plus minus something. And so we actually have to solve it as a plus and then also solve it as a minus. And so there's going to be 2 answers. Think about why there's always 2 answers for these. Quadratics form these parabolas. All right, so if y equals whatever, and in this case it's going to be 0, we want to know what are the 2 values. So when y equals 0, we're actually solving for the x intercepts, okay, which you'll see later on in Algebra 2 a lot. So we need to solve for the x intercepts. That's when y equals 0, and that creates one of these equations in the standard form that we can plug directly into the quadratic formula. There are other ways to solve these, but the quadratic formula works every single time. One of the most basic fundamental things we need to know to solve these types of equations. All right, so just working on these steps up here, the early questions, how do we deal with the plus minus? So we're literally going to rewrite it 2 times, once with the plus, once with the minus, and solve it both ways. So we're going to do 6 plus 5 divided by 2, and we're going to do 6 minus 5 divided by 2. And that will give us the 2 x-intercepts, or the 2 different answers. So 6 plus 5 is 11 divided by 2. That's 5.5. So x equals 5.5. And 6 minus 5 divided by 2. Okay, that's going to be 1 over 2, which is 1/2, which is 0.5. So 2 answers, 5.5 and 0.5. So number 2, this is negative 3 plus 12 divided by 5, and this is also negative 3 minus 12 divided by 5. So when I do negative 3 plus 12, that's 9. 9 divided by 5 will give you 1.8. Negative 3 minus 12 is negative 15. Divided by 5 is negative 3. All right, 0 plus or minus 8 over 6. So 0 plus 8 over 6. 0 minus 8 over 6. So here, because we're starting at 0, we're going to get positive 8 and negative 8 divided by 6. So if we do 8 divided by 6, we get 1.3 repeated. We don't want to put a repeated sign here. Ideally, we want to know that 0.3 repeated is 1/3. So it's 1.3 repeated, 1 and 1/3. And so x equals positive 1/3 and negative 1/3, which you can just write as plus or minus 1 and 1/3. You could also write them separately. Perfectly fine as well. All right, kind of branching out here now and starting to make it look like what we're going to see when we run the quadratic formula. So it's 9 plus or minus the square root of 49 divided by 4. Square root of 49 is 7. So this is 9 plus 7 over 4 and 9 minus 7 over 4. 7 times 7 is 49. So the square root of 49 is 7. So 9 plus 7 is 16 divided by 4 is just 4. 9 minus 7 is 2. 2 divided by 4, 2 over 4 is 1/2, and that is 0.5. All right, and then the last one shows you that you're not always going to have a nice, beautiful answer. So we're going to work with our decimals here. We're still splitting it up separately. I'm going to go ahead and take the square root, though, so I've got that number. So square root of 27.5625. It's 5.25. So that's what this is equal to. So it's going to be negative 3 plus 5.25 over 2, and then negative 3 minus 5.25 divided by 2. So if I go ahead, I could plug this all in if I wanted to. Negative 3 plus 5.25. Now you don't want to hit divided by 2 and write it like this, because your calculator is always going to follow order of operations. When you have addition and division in the same problem, it's going to divide first. And we know that we complete the entire quantity up top and then divide by 2 last. So if you wanted to write this out all in one step, you would have to use parentheses and say negative 3 plus 5.25. Parentheses signify that quantity. Order of operations says parentheses first, divided by 2. You could do it that way, or just do negative 3 plus 5.25, get that answer, and then divide it by 2. Okay, and it's going to get you there as well. So x equals Yep, and looking at the key that was posted, this is incorrect. So let's get the right answers here. 1.125 is correct. Your key, you can see when this key was made, the negative 3 disappeared and created some incorrect answers. So your key was incorrect here. So we have positive 1.125. And when we do negative 3 minus 5.25 and then divide that by 2, oops. We're going to get negative 4.125. So your key had those two numbers, but they just had the negative and the positive reversed. Because on the key, when the work was done, this negative disappeared on accident. Okay, so we need to make sure we got the right answers there. All right, for the bottom, we're going to run the full quadratic formula, and we're going to do it in steps. We're going to write this in standard form if necessary. Okay, that's where you have all of the pieces on this side besides the 0, and we're going to put them in the right order. We're going to call that part A. Part B, we're going to identify what's my A, what's my B, what's my C. And then part C, we're going to actually use the quadratic formula. So when I look at this one, everything's on the correct side. We've got x squared, the coefficient. We've got x with a coefficient, and then we also have a constant, just a number. And everything's on that side, which means 0 is over here. We can't have a number other than 0 on this side. So this is almost standard form, but ideally we want this in A, B, C form. So for part A, we want the x squared first, we want the x next, so minus 7x comes next, and then plus 6 comes last, equals 0. Now that's in standard form, which means now I can identify what everything is. So my A is the coefficient to x squared, that's 1. My B is my coefficient to x, which is negative 7. And my C is this other number here, and that's going to be 6. Now, we're going to plug this all into the quadratic formula. So just a reminder what that is. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Something that's going to need to be memorized eventually. Okay, right now it doesn't have to be memorized. You're going to have it in your notes when you take your quiz. But when you get to, say, the SAT, this is something that is going to be drilled in your head, and you're going to have this available to you, hopefully on memory. So we're going to go ahead and plug in our A, our B, and our C into all of these spots, and we're going to solve it. So negative b, so b is already negative 7. So it would be negative 7. If you want to write that out, you can. Negative 7, but we know two negatives is going to make a positive, so this will be plus. Plus or minus, that brings us back to here, so we'll have to solve it once with plus, once with minus. Inside here, b squared, so negative 7 squared. If you were going to write the whole thing out, you would put it in parentheses. Remember, any negative number squared becomes a positive. If you plug this into your calculator and you don't put parentheses, it's going to give you a negative answer. We need to know that it's a positive answer. Minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 6. All divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 1. Now, as you get faster at these, you can kind of shortcut some of this and not have to write it all out. But at least for this first one here, we're going to write it all out. So we have positive 7 plus or minus. So in here, this becomes a 49. And if you want to, you can leave this as subtraction and multiply 4 times 1 times 6, which would be a positive number, so it's going to say minus whatever that is. And the key looks kind of goofy here too. Yeah, the key's incorrect on this as well, so we'll have to fix that. So the 4 times the 1 times the 6, you can count this as a negative 4 if you want to, or you can just multiply all these together. So the 4 times 1 is 4, times 6 is 24. And then we're going to go ahead and subtract. So 49 minus 24 is 25. So inside this, we're going to have the square root of 25. And actually, I was looking at the wrong part of the key. The key is perfectly fine. So we get 25 in here, and we still have 2 on the bottom. Now we know the square root of 25 is 5. So when we do split this up into 2 pieces like we did up top, it's going to be 7 plus 5 and 7 minus 5. Square root of 25, nice whole number. So we split this into 2 pieces, just like we did up top. So 7 plus 5 divided by 2, 7 minus 5 divided by 2. So here we're going to get 12 over 2, which is 6. And here we're going to get 2 over 2, which is 1. So x equals 6, and x also equals 1. Okay, number 7. First thing we want to do, part A, is put this into standard form. So we need everything on the same side of the equal sign, which means this 5 needs to go to the other side. So how do we get it there? We're going to minus 5 from both sides, which will give us 0 on this side, which is standard form. So part A, put this in standard form. We're going to have 0 over here. The minus 5 cannot combine and simplify with the x squared of the 4x, so it's going to stay separate. And we want the x squared first, followed by the x, followed by the whole number, so negative 5, since it was a minus, equals 0. So there's standard form. From that, we can find our a, b, and c. So coefficient of x squared is a, that's 1. Coefficient of x is b, that's 4. And this number, the minus counts as a negative, is your c, that's negative 5. All right, part C. Again, plugging into negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And I do encourage you to write this out every single time, because the more you write it out, the more you're going to just memorize it naturally. And this is something that you're going to want to memorize. So we have b equals 4. So that negative b is going to be negative 4 plus or minus square root of b squared. So 4 squared. Now I'm going to kind of start showing you some shortcuts here. So I'm just going to do 16 minus 4 times 1 times negative 5. And that's all divided by 2 times a, which is just going to end up being 2. Okay, so I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of. Now, when I see a negative here and a positive, and then I can choose whether this is negative or positive, I'm going to choose to make this minus 4 a negative 4 when I multiply here. So it's a negative times a positive times a negative. That's going to create a positive plus, and 4 times 5 is 20. And you can run that through the calculator if you need to. So again, I counted this as a negative 4 times 1 times negative 5, which gives me positive 20. So I wrote plus 20. If you don't like that, if that kind of confuses you, then do 4 times 1 times negative 5. Count the 4 as a positive. You get negative 20. So it's going to say 16 minus negative 20. Minus negative 20 goes plus plus, and you end up with the plus. So you can either consider this a negative 4 when you're multiplying, or leave the minus sign out front and count this as a positive. But if you end up with a negative, it's going to say minus a negative, which ends up plus anyway. And this is all over 2. So this is going to equal negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 36, which we know is 6 over 2. So we'll split this into two pieces, negative 4 plus 6 over 2, negative 4 minus 6 over 2. So this is going to equal 2 over 2. So x equals 1. This one's going to equal negative 10 over 2. So negative 5. So my answers are negative 1 and negative 5. All right, number 8. We've already got everything on the same side. We've got 0 over here. We just need to reorder this. So the x squared goes first. It's already there. Then we want the x, so minus 10x. And then this is a minus 8. From this, we can determine that a is the coefficient of x squared, it's 3. B is the coefficient of x, a minus counts as a negative 10. And for c, a minus counts as a negative 8. So now plugging in for part c, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Again, the more times you write it and say it, the quicker you're going to memorize it. So negative b, b's already negative 10. So it would say negative 10. So it becomes positive 10. Plug a negative into negative b becomes positive. Square root of b squared. So negative 10 squared is 100. 10 times 10. A negative and a negative is a positive when you're multiplying. Minus 4 times 3 times negative 8. All over 2 times a, which now is not a 1, it's a 3. So up here, since I see a negative 4 and a negative 8, I know this is going to become a plus. So it's a negative times a positive times a negative. So I know that this is going to say 100 plus 4 times 3 is 12 times 8 is 96. And that's all going to be over 6. Bring this over, 10 plus or minus the square root of 196 if you combine those, over 6. If we go ahead and take the square root of 196, we find that it's a nice even 14. So when I write this out as the plus and the minus, it's 10 plus 14 over 6, and it's 10 minus 14 over 6. So when I add it, I get 24 over 6, and when I divide, x equals 4. And if I do 10 minus 14, I get negative 4 over 6, which you could simplify to negative 2/3, or you could divide it, and you're going to get negative 0.6 repeated, which we also need to know is negative 2/3. For 0.3 repeated and 0.6 repeated, we're going to leave it as the 2/3 version instead of the repeated decimal. All right, 2 more. Now this one looks like it's not anywhere close to being in standard form, but really we already have the x squared and the x on the same side. It doesn't matter if it's the left side or the right side. So really this minus 2 just needs to end up on the other side, which I would just add 2 to both sides to do that. So I'm going to get a 0 over here, and when I write it, you can flip-flop your equal sign and put them on either side, and you haven't changed whether they're equal. So I'm going to start with my x squared. Okay, I'm not moving it to the other side. I don't have to do anything with it. It's staying right here, x squared plus 7x. Now, since I added the 2 to get it over here, it's going to be plus 2. So really, that was the right side. Equals, I can put it on this side if I want, and now there's 0 left on this side. So I'm going to identify my a as 1, my b as 7, and my c as 2. So all positives. So for part C, plugging in negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So negative b is negative 7. B squared, 7 squared is 49, minus 4 times 1 times 2. So all positives means it's going to say minus a positive number. And on the bottom, it's just 2 times 1, so that's nice and easy. So negative 7 plus or minus. So it's going to be 49 minus 8 over 2. So that's negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 2. Now, square root of 41 is not a nice number, as you can see. So we're going to leave that. We're not going to try and write out this whole decimal. We'll let the calculator handle it, and then we'll just round our final answer. Don't want to round early. Don't call it 6.4 and then work with it because it changes your answers down the line. So this is negative 7 plus the square root of 41 over 2. This is negative 7 minus the square root of 41 over 2. We can plug that whole thing in. So if we're going to do that in our calculators, be careful. Use parentheses. So negative 7 plus the square root of 41. I'm going to go to the side one, put my parentheses, divide by 2. Okay, I get this. I'm going to go ahead and round that. So depending on where you want to round this, 0.3. If I round here, it still rounds up to 0.3. So I'm going to go up with the negative. X equals negative 0.3. And then over here, do it again, but with a minus. So in parentheses, negative 7 minus the square root of 41. Go over to get the parentheses out here. Divided by 2. And we'll call that negative 6.7. So x equals negative 6.7. So the key to this problem, main thing to get out of it, is if you do end up with a square root that's not a nice whole number, carry it all the way through until your last step. Don't round it early. Always round only when you get to your final answer if needed. Okay, we got one more here. So this one is already in standard form. You might look at it and say, well, I don't see 3 terms over here, but I don't have a number over here other than 0, so I'm good. So my standard form is x squared minus 11x equals 0. So what does that mean? My a is the coefficient of x squared, that's 1. My b is the coefficient of x, that's negative 11. My c, I don't have one. Sure, you could try and move the 0 and add 0 to both sides, but really what's that going to do? If you wanted to write a plus 0 in here, you could, right? You haven't changed it. If you write a plus 10 or any other number, you've changed the equation. A plus 0 doesn't change anything. So c here is 0. Since you don't see a c, it's 0. So we're going to go ahead and solve this out. So again, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Negative b, I'm plugging a negative 11 in for b, so a negative 11 becomes positive 11, plus or minus, square root of 11 squared, it's negative, but when you square it, it's positive. It's 121 minus 4 times 1 times 0. Okay, so that's all going to become 0. So it doesn't matter what these numbers are. If this is a 0, this all becomes 0. So I can already start writing this here. Plus or minus, it's going to be the square root of, this goes away, 121. It'd be 121 minus 0, so it's 121. And it's just 2 times 1 on the bottom, so 2. Now the square root of 121, if you don't know it off the top of your head, plug it in, is 11. So that's a nice whole number. So this equals 11 plus or minus 11 over 2. So we have 11 plus 11 over 2. And we have 11 minus 11 over 2. So 11 plus 11 is 22 divided by 2. X equals 11. 11 minus 11 is 0 over 2. And 0 divided by 2 is 0. So that is a possible answer. We're not just going to write one answer of 11. X equals 0 is an answer. That's a number. And so my 2 answers here are 11 and 0.